I didn't move out to the edge of Blackwood County to star in a soap opera. I moved here for the silence. The kind of silence you can only find 20 miles past the last streetlight, where the asphalt surrenders to red dirt and the mornings smell like wet sage and strong coffee. I had just hung up my spurs after 30 years of chasing white-collar criminals for the government, trading my badge for 90 acres of freedom and a front porch view that looked like a painting, thinking my fighting days were buried in the past. But life has a funny way of throwing a punch when you've got your hands in your pockets. Because exactly 1 week into my retirement, I walked down to my mailbox and pulled out a white envelope that felt heavier than it looked, a simple piece of paper that was trying to steal my life. The letter was embossed with a gold seal that screamed self-importance, demanding immediate payment of over $14,000 in back dues, assessments, and accrued interest to an organization called the Oakwood Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, an entity that, to my knowledge, didn't exist, at least not on my land. I stood there in the dust, the Texas sun beating down on my neck, and just laughed, thinking it was a clerical error or a bad prank, because my nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the only community meetings we held out here were between the coyotes and the stray cattle. But as I read closer, the laughter died in my throat, replaced by that cold, familiar prickle on the back of my neck that I used to get when I found a discrepancy in a tax audit. Because the letter wasn't asking, it was threatening foreclosure on Parcel 4A, my land, my retirement, my home. The signature at the bottom was curled and sharp, like barbed wire, reading Brenda Sterling, President, and the tone was polite in that venomous way that Southern hospitality sometimes masks, suggesting that this was all just a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a check. But I knew better. I went inside, the coffee in my mug suddenly tasting like battery acid, and pulled out the ironclad deed I had spent 3 years saving for, a document that I had vetted with the paranoia of a man who spent decades watching people lose everything to fine print. I traced the property lines, confirmed the history, and verified for the 100th time that my ranch was free and clear, absolutely independent of any subdivision, HOA, or covenant. Yet when I called the number on the letter, a sugary voice told me to leave a message for the board, as if they were doing me a favor by letting me keep my own dirt. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I drafted a response that was less of a letter and more of a legal scalpel, attaching my title insurance, the county survey, and a statute citation that basically told them to pound sand, mailing it certified because I knew that in the world of paper wars, if you can't prove you sent it, you didn't say it. I thought that would be the end of it, just a bully testing the fence line. But 3 days later, the escalation arrived in a thick, padded envelope containing a glossy, color-printed map that made my blood run cold. It was titled Updated Community Boundaries, Oakwood Ridge, and on this piece of fiction, a bright red line had been drawn that didn't just border my property. It swallowed it whole, claiming my pasture, my barn, and my house were now subject to their bylaws. The fury I felt wasn't the hot, screaming kind. It was the cold, calculating focus of a hunter, so I drove into town the next morning, the fake map riding shotgun like a captured enemy combatant, and marched into the Blackwood County Clerk's office, a place that smelled of floor wax and bureaucratic stagnation. The clerk, a young kid named Jason who looked like he was about 12 years old, seemed confused when I slid the forgery across the counter and asked for the official record, his eyes bouncing between the real county plat on his screen and the glossy lie I had brought in. When I told him to check the metadata on the file used to generate their claim, his face went pale as he whispered that the file had been created just 2 weeks ago and uploaded from a private IP address registered to the Oakwood Ridge main office, not the county surveyor. Just as the gravity of the fraud was settling in, a gravelly voice behind me said, "That ain't right." And I turned to see an old man in a faded denim shirt, holding a beat-up Stetson, looking like he was carved out of the local limestone. He introduced himself as Old Man Miller, the retired county surveyor who had drawn the original lines of this county with his own 2 hands back when Brenda Sterling was probably still in grade school. He looked at the map, scoffed, and pulled out a worn notepad, scribbling a sworn statement right there on the counter that declared the HOA's map a clumsy forgery, noting the wrong ink weight, the incorrect seal placement, and the fact that they had tried to annex land that had been independent since the Reconstruction. Walking out of that courthouse with Miller's affidavit tucked into my binder felt like loading the first round into a chamber, But Brenda and her cronies weren't waiting for the law. They were playing by the rules of intimidation. When I got back to the ranch, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the driveway. And that's when I saw the glint of metal where it shouldn't be. Someone had come onto my property while I was gone, wrapped a heavy-duty logging chain around my front gate, and slapped a shiny aluminum sign on the post that read Property of Oakwood Ridge Estates. Access restricted pending debt resolution. I stared at that chain, the violation hitting me harder than the financial threat, because they hadn't just sent a letter this time. They had physically touched my life, locking me out of my own sanctuary. I called the sheriff's department, my voice steady but vibrating with rage, and waited 45 minutes for Deputy Higgins to roll up in a dust-covered cruiser, looking bored and annoyed before he even put the truck in park. He took one look at the sign, adjusted his sunglasses, and gave me the "it's a civil matter" speech that lazy law enforcement officers memorize to avoid paperwork, telling me that since there was a dispute over jurisdiction, he couldn't cut the lock. I watched him drive away, the dust settling on the sign that claimed I was a trespasser on my own land, and I realized then that the system wasn't going to save me. Not yet. I called a tow truck driver I knew, a guy who didn't ask questions as long as the cash was green, and 20 minutes later, the sound of bolt cutters snapping through hardened steel echoed across the valley like a gunshot. We ripped their sign out of the ground, roots and all, and as I stood there in the twilight, watching the first stars come out over a battlefield that used to be my home, I knew this wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was war, and Brenda Sterling had no idea who she had just locked out. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I turned my property into a surveillance grid, mounting 4K trail cameras in the oak trees and wiring a motion-activated floodlight that could blind a pilot, because I knew a personality like Brenda's wouldn't take a cut chain as a defeat. She would take it as a dare. I sat in the dark of my living room, the glow of the monitor washing over my face, waiting for the inevitable return, and sure enough, at 5:48 a.m., the motion sensor chimed softly, waking the dogs. The screen flickered to life, revealing a figure in a tracksuit marching up my driveway with the entitlement of a queen inspecting her colonies, holding a flashlight in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. It was her, Brenda Sterling, in the flesh, and the camera caught the exact moment she realized the chain was gone. Her face twisted not into fear, but into a sneer of pure arrogance. She walked right up to the lens, stared into the soul of the camera, and flipped me the bird, a slow, deliberate gesture that said she owned the sheriff, the county, and the dirt I was standing on. She taped an envelope to the gate post and marched back to her car, but she had made a fatal error. She thought she was intimidating a victim, but she was actually providing evidence to a prosecutor. I waited until her taillights vanished before I walked down the drive to retrieve the package, the morning mist clinging to my boots, and tore open the envelope to find a document that looked terrifyingly official. It was a notice to appear for a hearing regarding unpaid debts, scheduled for the following Friday at 7 a.m., signed by Judge Arthur P. Sterling of the Blackwood Civil Court. I stared at the name, my brain itching with a memory I couldn't quite place, until I ran back to the house and did a quick search of the county obituaries, confirming my suspicion with a mixture of horror and dark delight. Judge Sterling was indeed a real judge, or at least he had been, until he died of a massive coronary 3 years ago, meaning unless the afterlife had a jurisdiction in Texas small claims, Brenda had just committed felony forgery of a court instrument. I needed a shark, not a gentle family attorney who did wills and estates, so I called Veronica Sharp, a lawyer known for eating HOAs for breakfast and using their bylaws as toothpicks. We met at a diner halfway to the city, and when I slapped the binder on the table, containing the fake map, Old Man Miller's affidavit, the video of the trespass, and the summons from the ghost judge, her eyes lit up with a terrifying kind of joy. Veronica didn't just see a defense. She saw a RICO case wrapped in a bow, telling me that we weren't just going to sue them, we were going to dismantle them brick by brick, but first, we had to let them hang themselves publicly. The opportunity came sooner than we expected, with a flyer posted at the gas station announcing the annual Oakwood Ridge Unity Fair, a mandatory fun event where Brenda planned to address the recent expansions of the community. Saturday morning, I rolled into the fairgrounds, which was just the HOA parking lot dressed up with balloons and cheap streamers, carrying a portable projector and a sense of grim purpose, with Veronica walking beside me in a power suit that cost more than Brenda's car. The crowd was a mix of terrified residents and sycophantic board members, all gathered around a makeshift stage where Brenda was holding a microphone, preaching about community standards and the need to reel in rogue elements. She froze when she saw me, her smile cracking like old plaster, but she tried to play it cool, welcoming me with a condescending joke about new neighbors finally learning to participate. I didn't say a word. I just set up my portable screen on a folding table, plugged in the generator, and nodded to Veronica, who announced to the crowd that under state law, this was an open assembly, and we had a presentation of our own. Before Brenda could signal her goons to cut the power, I hit play, and the screen illuminated with a side-by-side comparison of the official county map and Brenda's MS Paint masterpiece, the red lines clearly showing the attempted theft of my land. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but I didn't stop there. I clicked the remote and brought up the summons, zooming in on the signature of the late Judge Sterling alongside his obituary, asking the crowd if they knew their dues were paying for a medium to contact the dead. Brenda started shouting that this was out of order, her voice climbing an octave into hysteria, but the crowd wasn't listening to her anymore. They were staring at the screen where the video of her flipping off my camera played on a loop. Then, the kill shot. I played the audio clip of the clerk, Jason, confirming the map was uploaded from her office, proving that the expansion wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated fraud to seize assets and force foreclosures on innocent people. The atmosphere shifted instantly from confusion to mob anger, with homeowners shouting questions about their own fines, their own boundaries, realizing that the tyrant on the stage wasn't protecting their property values, she was robbing them blind. Brenda looked like a trapped rat, her eyes darting around for an exit, but Veronica stepped forward and dropped the bomb, announcing that we had already filed a class action injunction and that the district attorney had been very interested in the creative writing exercises Brenda had been doing with the judge's signature. The rally ended not with applause, but with the chaotic noise of an empire crumbling in real time, leaving Brenda standing alone on her stage, the microphone feeding back a high-pitched squeal that matched the panic in her eyes. The fallout was swift, brutal, and utterly satisfying, culminating in an emergency board meeting called the following Thursday, ostensibly for Brenda to clarify the misunderstandings, but everyone in that room knew it was a funeral for her career. The community center was packed to the rafters, the air thick with the smell of cheap coffee and expensive lawyers, but Brenda still marched to the podium in her best blazer, clinging to the delusion that she could talk her way out of a felony. She started her speech with the usual deflections, blaming computer errors and rogue contractors, but the doors at the back of the hall swung open, cutting her off mid-lie. D.A. Harrison walked in, flanked by 2 state troopers and a very pale-looking Deputy Higgins, who had apparently decided that saving his own pension was more important than protecting the HOA president. The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating silence, as the DA walked up the center aisle, ignored Brenda's demands for order, and calmly informed her that she was under arrest for fraud, forgery of a government instrument, and grand larceny. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest thing I have ever heard, a crisp, metallic snap that signaled the end of the tyranny, and as they marched her out, she looked at me, not with hate, but with the hollow confusion of a bully who never thought the victim would punch back. In the months that followed, the Oakwood Ridge HOA didn't just lose its leadership, it lost its existence. The court-ordered audit revealed that Brenda had been treating the reserve fund like her personal piggy bank, financing vacations and a new SUV while fining residents for the wrong shade of mulch. Veronica led the class action suit that stripped the organization down to the studs, liquidating their assets to pay back the homeowners she had scammed, and in a twist of poetic justice that I still chuckle about, the HOA office building itself was put up for auction. I bought it for pennies on the dollar, gutted the interior, and turned it into the Freedom Land Trust, a nonprofit center dedicated to helping rural landowners fight exactly this kind of bureaucratic theft. 5 years have passed since the day I cut that lock, and the ranch is quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than just found. I still sit on my porch with my coffee, watching the sun paint the Texas sky in purples and oranges, but now when I look at the gate, I don't see a threat, I see a scar that healed over stronger than the skin around it. The community has changed, too. Without the boot of the HOA on their necks, neighbors actually talk to each other. Fences are mended with handshakes instead of lawsuits, and the fear that used to permeate the valley has evaporated like morning mist. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the sheer audacity of it all, how a piece of paper and a fake signature almost took everything I worked a lifetime for. And it reminds me that freedom isn't a permanent state. It's an active decision you have to make every single day. We like to think that justice is blind and the law protects the innocent. But the truth I learned in the dust of Blackwood County is that the law only helps those who are willing to document, to fight, and to refuse to blink when the monster comes knocking. So here's the question I want you to chew on in the comments. If a stranger put a lock on your gate and claimed your home was theirs, would you wait for the police to file a report, or would you grab the bolt cutters and handle it yourself? Because out here, we learned that sometimes the only way to get peace is to be ready for war. Stay free, everyone.